In this recording, we are going to discuss how to use relational operators and if statements. So what a relational operator is, which we've seen them many times before, but they're simply things like less than, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, or in C++ we have equals equals as well as not equal. So those are the relational operators that we need to be aware of in C++. So let's go ahead and take a look at exactly how these function. So I have just built a, as it says here, a basic guessing game. And what happens is we have an answer which the user, which is just a random number between 1 and 10. And if you haven't seen the video on random number generation, that's okay. Just know that this line and this little section right here simply chooses a number between 1 and 10 at random. And so then we output to the user, I'm thinking of a number 1 through 10. Can you guess it? And then they enter in a guess. And then now we have 3 different cases. We can check if guess is greater than answer, if guess is less than answer, or if guess is equal to the answer. And you'll notice that this is a double equal sign. There's not just one equal sign there. There are 2, and that's very important. Because one equal sign in C++ is the assignment operator. This is how we do things like guess equals 5, in which we set guess equal to 5. Whereas guess equals 5 would compare the two to see if guess was equivalent to 5. And so let's put you guessed right, as well as at the very start, we'll say if guess is not equal to answer. And we'll output you guessed incorrectly. Well, let's say you guessed wrong. There we go. So now if we go ahead and run this with Control F5, we'll do 5, and you guessed wrong. You guessed too high. The answer was 2. So we'll run it again, and we'll say 7, and oh, we were too low that time. The answer was 8, and then we'll run it again, and sure enough, we guessed right, and that actually worked out perfectly. You guessed right. The answer was 4. And so we can see that when the guess was not equal to the answer, that we have an output of you guessed wrong. We also have, if the guess was greater than the answer, then you guessed too high. So how if statements work, with the basic structure of them, is they work almost exactly like they work just in English and speaking, where we say if, and then we have some sort of condition. And if that condition is true, then we execute this section. If it's not true, though, then this section gets skipped over. And so we saw that with things like when we guessed correctly, this section got skipped over, this section got skipped over, and this section got skipped over, but this one did not get skipped over. And the reason was because the guess was equal to the answer, so this was false. This was also false, this was false, but this section was true. One thing that's very important about if statements that beginning programmers often have a hard time with is that you do not put a semicolon after the if statement like this. That is not correct. You don't want to do that. The reason is because there's an interesting thing that happens with if statements in C++, where let's say that we say if guess equals 5, and then we can actually not put curly brackets, but note that this is pretty much always a bad idea. But we can put if guess equals 5, then we can say you entered 5. And then you'll notice that my cursor automatically went back to this point in the, so it's not indented up to here, but it's back at this indentation. And I can output this is outside the guess equals 5 if statement. And this line right here will always execute. Line 23 will always execute, whereas line 21 will only execute if guess is equal to 5. And so there's a something in C++ where if you don't have curly brackets after an if statement, or curly braces after an if statement, then the if statement only applies to the very next line of code. And so this can be very confusing and tricky because if I shift-tab this back, then we don't know that this line is in relation to this if statement. And so what happens is if we put a semicolon here, then even though it looks like this cout statement is dealing with this if statement, what's actually happening is we have an empty instruction right here that we're ending with a semicolon. And this is kind of advanced and definitely not super necessary to know. But it's important to know that you should never, ever have a semicolon directly after parentheses like this in the case of an if statement. So let's just get rid of all of this entirely. And this can be avoided. This issue or problem or error or whatever you want to call it can be avoided by always using braces, these curly braces. You always want to use those. So let's go ahead and just take a look at this one more time, running it. Now that we know a little bit better what the code looks like and how exactly it works, let's go ahead and run it. And I'm thinking of a number 1 through 10. Can you guess it? And we'll just guess 7. And we guessed wrong. And so that means that this was true. Guess was not equal to the answer. And then you guessed too low, so we know that our guess was less than the answer. And so this was false, this was false, and now we have our final. The answer was answer, and we can see that the answer was 9.